I involved in communism?
Yeah.
Well, I'm involved in raising the ideas, the necessity of socialism and communism to the public, to the workers of the world, right? So that's a very famous line that Karl Marx wrote in the Communist Manifesto, which laid things out in 1848, where he said that everyone's interests, regardless of where they're born, regardless of which country they live in, regardless of where they fall in behind an arbitrary line on the map, they all have the same interests. They all have the same desires. They want to live a happy, fulfilling life. They want to be able to enjoy a fulfilling life, to learn, to raise a family, and all of those things is what we all share as human beings and as workers. And just trying to bring about those ideas to as many people as possible, the working class, as possible. So that's how I'm involved.
So are you part of a party, the Communist Party, or are you an academic who teaches the public?
So I'm not part of a party. I am part of an organization, though, that tries to bring these ideas to the mass organizations of the working class. So that depends on where you're at. So in the U.S., we don't have a labor party. We don't have a workers' party. So our perspective is we want to be able to build that labor party at some point down the road. But where we are right now is where a lot of the workers are. So a lot of the trade unions, or a lot of the workers' rights organizations, that's where we are right now in the U.S. But in other countries, there are workers' parties and are labor parties, and my organization has comrades in those organizations that try to instill those ideas of class struggle and of socialism and communism to those mass organizations of the working class. So I'm part of an organization that's not a party, but it operates within parties in other countries where there is a labor party or a workers' party.
Okay. So I recently interviewed someone who grew up in a communist country. Like they said, it was Cuba.
Cuba, okay.
Yeah. The cons kind of outweighed the pros. Like, how would that affect us? Do you mean
how would the bad affect you?
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of people have misunderstandings of when they say what a communist country is. I think communism, first off, we've got to define what communism is. So communism is a stateless, classless society. So when we have a society where there are no class divisions, so there are no divisions between workers or a boss, or I'm a manager, or I need to sell my labor power as for a wage to survive. We've done away with all those class divisions. So no society, no country has achieved communism yet. There are countries that that subscribe to that label, socialism and communism. A lot of those countries have degenerated because of a bureaucracy that has emerged. Cuba is what I would consider a worker state, but it's a deformed worker state. It has a nationalized property form. A lot of it isn't in the hands of private industry, which is a good thing, but it doesn't have that essential element of full participation of workers' democracy. So it's a worker state, but it's an incomplete state. It's in a deformed state. So a lot of what you hear about the bad things about quote unquote communist countries comes from a degeneration of it, a form of it that has its pros, but also has its cons too. And what we are fighting for here in the United States and around the world too is to build an international movement of workers across the world that have full participation in their workplace, that control the means of production, because the workers themselves, they create all wealth. Labor creates all wealth. The boss needs you more than you need the boss. And really building those genuine, with every, and having that full participation from the workers. So that's how I would explain what your friend said, came from Cuba, is that there are pros and cons, just like with any other form of government, especially with a capitalist government. But I think it's very interesting that this question is always only asked about communist countries or allegedly communist countries, but no one ever says that all the flaws of the United States is an indictment of capitalism, right? It always says, we never say that all the homeless people, all the people that die because of health care, all the countries that the United States bombed, it's never a failure of capitalism, right? It's always, well, we do bad things, but inherently we're still good. But all the bad things about communism means, well, that must mean the whole thing is bad. And all those flaws, which are not communism, are magnified to blame and to slander socialism and communism. So that's how that's a really long answer to your question, but hopefully I was able to capture what I think is the best way to look at that.
Yeah. But we've been used to capitalism for so long. What would make people willingly change?
Well, I think historically, capitalism hasn't really existed for that long. In a grand scheme of human development, it's only really emerged on the scene since about 200, 300 years ago, around the turn of the 18th century. Before that, we had something called feudalism. So a lot of you guys maybe watch Game of Thrones, right? Or those types of shows, fantasy shows, right? You have a king, you have a queen, you have a feudal lord, and that was previously the economic system for a very, very long period of time. That ended, right? That ended through revolutions and revolts from the people, from the peasantry, right? We've got, in this country, the American colonists overthrew the British crown because they felt that, well, as wealthy landowners, we should decide our own fate, not one landowner, but we decide a class of landowners to decide. But nonetheless, they still decided that they should change how they run things. And the thing is with capitalism is that it's not permanent. It's only been on the world stage for a relatively short period of time compared to the vast length of history. And I think why people can change, or why you think people will change, is that they can't actually live in the current way much longer, right? Everyone's working longer, harder, for less money, right? So everything costs more. Rent's really high. Healthcare costs are really high. Climate change is increasing. All these issues, all these factors are making life more and more hard. People are in lots of debt. There's lots of refugees.